November 3rd, 2023. Marcus Washington had thrown his last professional punch 12 years ago. The crowd at Ford Field knew him as the heavyweight who never got his title shot. They didn't know about the little girl's blood on his hands. Sophia Martinez was 8 years old when she ran into that gym. Fists clenched like her mama taught her. She looked up at the 240-pound former contender and said 5 words that would haunt Detroit forever. "They're hurting my mom, mister." What Marcus did in the next 3 hours brought down the biggest human trafficking ring in Michigan history. It also revealed why his own daughter really died, and why some fights can only end one way. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you: the hook. The fluorescent lights in Washington's gym flickered like dying fireflies, casting shadows that danced across the cracked concrete floor. Marcus pressed his back against the heavy bag, his exhibition gloves still damp with sweat from the charity match an hour ago. The crowd at Ford Field had cheered loud enough to rattle his bones, but now the silence in his empty gym felt heavier than any opponent he'd ever faced. Blood dripped from his split knuckle onto the floor, a reminder that 58-year-old hands weren't meant for comeback fights, even exhibition ones. He should have been icing his joints, counting the night's modest take, maybe allowing himself one drink to celebrate staying sober another day. Instead, he was staring at 8-year-old Sophia Martinez, who stood in his doorway like a ghost made flesh. Her small frame trembled in an oversized Detroit Lions jacket, tears carving clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. Marcus had seen that look before, the wide-eyed terror of a child who'd witnessed something no kid should ever see. It was the same expression his daughter Angie wore the night she called him, voice breaking as she whispered about David's hands and what they did when Mama wasn't looking. The night Marcus chose the bottle over the drive across town. "Mister, please." Sophia's voice cracked like thin ice. "They got guns and everything." Marcus's blood turned to slush. He'd learned long ago that when children spoke about guns, you listened. When they spoke about hurt, you moved. When they spoke about Mama, you ran. Where? The word came out rougher than he intended, filtered through 15 years of cigarettes and regret. Sophia pointed toward the abandoned Packard plant, where Detroit's industrial dreams went to die. The big building with the broken windows, the one that looks like a monster. Marcus knew it well. Half the city did. The plant had been gutted years ago, its hollow shell now home to scrappers, addicts, and worse. Police rarely ventured there after dark, not because they couldn't, but because some of them didn't want to see what might be hiding in those shadows. How many men? Marcus peeled off his exhibition gloves, his hands moving with muscle memory toward the gym bag where he kept things from, his other life, the one before boxing saved him from the streets. 3, maybe 4. They got my mama tied up in the room with all the chains. Chains. Marcus's jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth. In his 15 years running this gym, training kids from the neighborhood, he'd heard stories, whispers about girls who vanished from bus stops, about women who answered job ads and never came home. The kind of stories that made grown men check their locks twice and kept mothers awake at night. Detroit PD called it an epidemic they couldn't solve. Marcus suspected they weren't trying hard enough. He pulled on his street clothes, movements sharp and deliberate. The charity match had been for show. Controlled punches, pulled shots, enough spectacle to raise money for the gym's rent. But this wasn't exhibition fighting. This was the other kind, the kind that ended with sirens or silence. "What's your mama's name, sweetheart?" "Rosa. Rosa Martinez. She cleans offices downtown." Sophia wiped her nose with her sleeve. "She was supposed to pick me up from my friend's house, but she never came. Then I saw her car by the Monster Building and heard her screaming." Marcus checked his phone, 11:47 p.m. 3 hours since Sophia's mom was supposed to collect her daughter. In Marcus's experience, that was either 3 hours too late or just enough time if you moved fast and hit hard. He locked the gym's cash box in the floor safe, muscle memory guiding his fingers through the combination. The night's exhibition earnings, maybe $800, felt insignificant compared to what might be happening 6 blocks away in that industrial graveyard. "Listen to me, Sophia." Marcus knelt down, meeting her eyes. "I need you to go next door to Mrs. Chen's shop. Tell her Marcus sent you and that you need to use the phone to call your grandmother or uncle, someone safe. Can you do that?" She nodded, but her small hand grabbed his wrist. "You'll get her back?" The question hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. Angie had asked him the same thing during that last phone call, voice small and scared as she begged him to come get her, to take her somewhere David couldn't find them. Marcus had promised he would, right after this one drink, this one hand of cards, this one thing that seemed more important than his daughter's terror. He'd made promises before, broken them before, lost everything that mattered before, but some fights can only end one way. "Yeah, sweetheart," Marcus said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "I'll bring your mama home." As Sophia disappeared into the Detroit night, Marcus shouldered his bag and stepped into darkness that had been waiting 15 years to reclaim him. Introduction. The Detroit night air hit Marcus like a cold slap, carrying the familiar cocktail of industrial decay and urban desperation that had perfumed his neighborhood for decades. He stood outside Washington's gym. The name still felt strange after all these years, painted in fading yellow letters across brick that had witnessed the city's rise and fall, watching Sophia's small silhouette disappear into Mrs. Chen's corner store. The old woman would take care of the girl. Margaret Chen had been feeding hungry kids and harboring strays since before Marcus bought this place with his last fight purse. She'd never asked questions about the men who sometimes visited his gym after hours, never mentioned the sounds that occasionally drifted through the thin walls they shared. In Detroit, survival meant knowing when to look the other way. Marcus pulled his leather jacket tighter against the October chill and started walking toward the Packard plant. Each step carried him deeper into the ruins of American manufacturing, past shuttered storefronts with security gates like metal teeth, past houses with boarded windows that still somehow managed to leak warm light and the smell of home cooking. This was his neighborhood, had been for 8 years now, ever since he'd crawled out of the bottle and decided to plant roots somewhere nobody knew about his failures. The gym had been his salvation, and his penance rolled into one. Every morning at 5 a.m. he unlocked those doors and transformed pain into purpose, teaching kids like Sophia to keep their guards up, to plant their feet, to hit back when the world swung first. The work was honest in a way his fighting career never had been. No promoters whispering about taking dives, no managers skimming percentages, no crowds screaming for blood they'd never have to clean up. Just Marcus and whoever needed teaching. Kids from broken homes learning that their fists could build instead of destroy. Teenagers trading corner dealing for corner work in the ring. Sometimes grown men like himself carrying damage too heavy for one person to lift alone. The exhibition match tonight had been his first time back in the spotlight since retiring. Local sports writer had talked him into it. Something about inspiring the community, showing that Detroit legends never really quit fighting. The crowd had been small but enthusiastic, and for 40 minutes under those bright lights, Marcus had almost remembered what it felt like to be somebody worth cheering for. Now, walking through shadows that seemed to swallow streetlight whole, he wondered if inspiration was just another word for foolish hope. His phone buzzed. Text from Elena Vasquez, the social worker who sent most of his kids his way. "Heard you looked good tonight. Coffee tomorrow?" Elena. The thought of her stopped him mid-stride for just a moment. 5 months of coffee dates that felt like something more, of conversations that ran past midnight, of a woman who looked at his scars and saw survival instead of damage. She knew about Angie, about David, about the 15 years Marcus had spent learning to live with choices that couldn't be unmade. But she didn't know about the other thing, the darkness he'd carried since that phone call, the weight of promises broken and daughters lost. He typed back, maybe. "Depends how tonight goes." The Packard plant loomed ahead like a concrete dinosaur, its broken windows reflecting nothing but emptiness. Marcus had walked past this place thousands of times, but tonight it looked different, predatory, as if something inside was watching him approach. He thought about Sophia's tear-streaked face, about Rosa Martinez tied up somewhere in those ruins. But mostly he thought about Angie's voice on that last phone call, 17 years old and terrified, begging him to come save her from her stepfather's hands. Marcus had been deep in a poker game at Mickey's bar, 3 sheets to the wind, and convinced he could win back everything he'd lost that month. Just one more hand, he'd told himself, just finish this drink. She'll be fine for another hour. By the time he'd made it to Deborah's house, The ambulance was already pulling away. David had claimed Angie fell down the stairs, slipped on a wet spot, tragic accident. He was heartbroken. The responding officer was Detective Ray Coleman, who took David's statement without writing much down and told Marcus maybe he should have been home instead of drinking with his low-life friends. The coroner's report listed accidental death. The investigation lasted exactly 6 days. Detective Coleman closed the case with all the enthusiasm of a man checking items off a grocery list. Marcus had spent the next 7 years drowning in guilt and bourbon, until the day he woke up in a hospital bed and couldn't remember how he'd gotten there. That's when he'd started over. New city, new purpose, new promise to never let another child down the way he'd let Angie down. He reached the plant's perimeter fence, its chain links topped with razor wire that caught moonlight like metal teeth. Somewhere beyond that barrier, Rosa Martinez was counting on a man she'd never met to be better than his worst moment. Marcus found a gap in the fence and squeezed through, feeling the city's darkness close around him like a familiar coat. Some promises, he thought, were worth keeping. Inciting incident. The interior of the Packard plant stretched before Marcus like the ribcage of some massive, decomposing beast. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the collapsed roof, casting geometric shadows across a floor littered with 15 years of urban decay, broken glass, rusted machinery, and the detritus of lives lived in society's margins. The air tasted of mold and motor oil, with an underlying sweetness that made his stomach clench. He moved through the darkness with practiced silence, every footstep deliberate. Somewhere in this concrete maze, Rosa Martinez was counting on him. Marcus couldn't afford to be the man he'd been 15 years ago, drunk, distracted, always one excuse away from doing the right thing. A sound reached him from deeper in the plant. Voices, low and urgent. Male laughter that made his skin crawl. He followed the noise through a corridor lined with stripped electrical conduit, past graffitied walls that told the story of Detroit's long decline in spray-painted fragments. The voices grew louder as he approached what had once been a supervisor's office. Light spilled from beneath a door that hung askew on broken hinges. Marcus pressed himself against the wall and listened. Shipment leaves tomorrow night. These Detroit girls fetch good money down south. Fresh meat, you know? What about the kid? She saw us grab her mother. Kids don't matter. Who's gonna believe some 8-year-old spick? Marcus's vision went red around the edges. He forced himself to breathe, to think tactically instead of emotionally. 3 voices, maybe 4. At least one gun. He'd heard the distinctive click of a magazine being checked. Going in blind would be suicide. That's when his phone buzzed. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the industrial silence. Marcus fumbled for the device, but the damage was already done. The voices stopped. Footsteps approached the door. What the hell was that? Marcus looked at the screen and felt the world tilt sideways. Unknown number, but the message made his blood freeze. Time to finish what we started 15 years ago. Your daughter sends her regards from the grave. R.C. Ray Coleman. The corrupt detective who'd buried Angie's case was here, in this place, tonight. Marcus stared at the phone screen as fragments of impossible hope and terrible understanding crashed together in his mind. Coleman knew he was here, had known he would come. This wasn't coincidence, it was orchestration, a trap. Check the hallway, someone ordered from inside the room. Could be cops. Cops don't come here, and we own the ones who do. We own the ones who do. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. How deep did this corruption run? How many Detective Colemans were there, taking money to look the other way while women and children disappeared into shipping containers and shallow graves? Heavy boots moved toward the door. Marcus had seconds to decide. Run back into the Detroit night and call for help that might never come, or stand and fight with hands that hadn't thrown punches in anger for over a decade. But as he backed deeper into the shadows, his foot hit something that shouldn't have been there. A small object that skittered across the concrete with a sound like dice rolling. Marcus looked down and saw his daughter's class ring, the one she'd been wearing the night she died, the one that had mysteriously vanished from the evidence locker. Angie's ring. Here, in this place of horrors. His hands shook as he picked up the silver band, feeling the weight of 15 years' worth of unanswered questions. The inscription inside was exactly as he remembered. Angela Washington, class of '09. Love always, Dad. The ring he'd given her for her 16th birthday. The ring she'd worn every day until Detective Coleman claimed it had been lost during processing. The ring that proved, well, Iron Will Washington in the flesh. Marcus looked up to find Detective Ray Coleman standing in the doorway, older and heavier than 15 years ago, but still carrying himself with that same predatory confidence. He wore civilian clothes now, but Marcus could see the shoulder holster beneath his jacket, the badge clipped to his belt like a talisman of corrupted authority. "Thought you might show up eventually," Coleman continued, stepping into the hallway with 3 other men flanking him. "Amazing what a crying kid can accomplish when you put her in the right place at the right time. Sophia." They'd used Sophia as bait. "Rosa Martinez?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "Real enough. So's her situation. But little Sophia?" Coleman smiled without warmth. "Let's just say she's very good at following directions for 8 years old, especially when her older sister's life depends on it." Marcus felt the last pieces of his old life crumble away like concrete dust. Everything he'd built, the gym, the sobriety, the fragile peace, all of it had been an illusion. The past had finally found him, wearing Detective Ray Coleman's face and carrying 15 years of buried sins. Some promises, Marcus thought as his hands curled into fists, demanded blood to keep them. The hallway felt smaller now, as if the concrete walls were closing in. Marcus clutched Angie's ring in his left hand, while his right hung loose at his side, muscle memory from 1,000 training sessions telling him to stay balanced, stay ready. But 15 years of sobriety and gym work hadn't prepared him for this, facing the man who'd destroyed his family while surrounded by armed accomplices in an abandoned building where screams would echo into nothing. "You look confused, Washington." Coleman's voice carried that same patronizing tone Marcus remembered from the police station, from those 6 days when he'd begged for a real investigation into his daughter's death. "Let me help you understand your situation." "I understand plenty," Marcus said, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. "You killed my daughter, you're trafficking women, and you used a little girl to bring me here." One of Coleman's men, tall, scarred, with prison tattoos creeping up his neck, shifted his weight and moved his hand toward his waistband. Marcus tracked the motion while keeping his eyes on Coleman. 3 decades of boxing had taught him to see everything without looking directly at anything. "Your daughter was an accident," Coleman said with the casual indifference of a man discussing weather. "David was supposed to scare her into keeping quiet about what she'd seen. Kid was nosier than we thought, kept asking questions about why her mama had so much cash all of a sudden." The words hit Marcus like body shots, each one stealing a little more air from his lungs. What she'd seen. Deborah was one of our recruiters. Single mothers make excellent scouts. They know which girls are vulnerable, which families won't be missed. Your ex-wife was very good at her job until your daughter started asking uncomfortable questions. Marcus felt the hallway spinning around him. Deborah. His ex-wife had been part of this operation, had gotten Angie killed because their daughter was too smart, too curious, too much like her father for her own good. "We offered you a simple choice back then," Coleman continued. "Take the settlement money, drink yourself to death quietly, and leave Detroit forever. You chose option 3, disappearing just enough to make us think you'd given up, but staying close enough to be a problem." "I wasn't a problem," Marcus said, though even as he spoke the words, he knew they were lies. "I kept my head down. Built something clean." "Clean?" Coleman laughed, and the sound echoed off broken concrete like breaking glass. "You think we didn't know about Washington's gym? About every kid you trained, every fight you fixed, every time you played hero in the neighborhood? You think we didn't have people watching?" The scarred man was moving again, trying to flank him. Marcus shifted position, keeping his back to the wall. In the distance, he could hear something that might have been crying. Rosa Martinez, maybe, or some other woman who'd trusted the wrong job advertisement. "Elena knows where I am," Marcus said, grasping for leverage he wasn't sure he had. "I told her I was coming here." "Elena Vasquez?" Coleman's smile widened. "The social worker who's been sending you all those troubled kids? The one you've been having coffee with for 5 months?" "Marcus, You really need to stop trusting women who are too good to be true. The words hit him like a perfect right cross, stunning and immediate. Elena. His coffee dates, his late-night conversations, his growing hope that maybe he could have something good again. All of it orchestrated, all of it lies. She's been very helpful, Coleman continued, feeding us information about which kids might be vulnerable, which families might not fight too hard if someone disappeared. Amazing how much people tell their social workers. And Elena, she tells us everything. Marcus wanted to sit down, wanted to process this betrayal properly, but the scarred man was still moving, and Coleman's other accomplices were spreading out to block the hallway. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a execution delay. Why? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure if he meant why kill Angie, why destroy his life, why use Elena, or why not just finish him years ago. Because some people don't know when to quit, Coleman said. Because you're the type of man who keeps promises, even when keeping them gets everyone around you killed. Because you looked at that crying little girl tonight and decided to be a hero instead of walking away. The detective pulled his service weapon, a .40 caliber Glock that looked well-maintained and frequently used. His men followed suit, 3 more guns emerging from concealment with practiced ease. The thing is, Washington, we learned from our mistake with your daughter. This time, there won't be any evidence to lose, any investigation to close, any grieving father to worry about. You came here looking for Rosa Martinez, got in over your head, and died trying to be something you were never meant to be. Marcus closed his eyes for just a moment, feeling the weight of Angie's ring against his palm. When he opened them again, the fear was still there, but it was buried beneath something harder. He'd spent 15 years learning to live with failure. Tonight, he was going to learn what dying with purpose felt like. The first gunshot came from behind him. Marcus dove sideways as plaster exploded from the wall where his head had been, rolling into a broken doorframe as Coleman's men scrambled for cover. But the shot hadn't come from them. It had come from deeper in the plant, followed by a woman's voice screaming in Spanish and the sound of running feet. What the hell? Coleman barked into a radio Marcus hadn't seen. Perimeter team, report. Static answered him, then another gunshot, closer this time. In the chaos, Marcus saw his chance and took it. He lunged forward, driving his shoulder into the scarred man's midsection and sending them both crashing into the opposite wall. The man's gun flew wide, clattering across concrete as Marcus drove 3 quick uppercuts into his solar plexus. Combinations he'd practiced 10,000 times, muscle memory overriding 15 years of peaceful intentions. The scarred man dropped hard, gasping for air that wouldn't come. "Kill him!" Coleman shouted, but his remaining men were distracted by whatever firefight was erupting elsewhere in the plant. Marcus grabbed the fallen pistol and rolled behind a concrete pillar as bullets sparked off rebar and shattered glass around him. His phone was buzzing again. Text message: Rosa's safe, Sophia too, but Elena's here and she has more men coming. You need to run, now. D? Marcus stared at the screen in confusion until another memory surfaced. David Hutchins, his daughter's stepfather. The man who'd supposedly killed her by accident was texting him warnings? Movement on the north side, someone was shouting into a radio. Multiple shooters. This wasn't supposed to happen. Marcus heard Coleman's voice, tight with barely controlled rage. I don't care who's shooting at what. Washington dies tonight, and so does anyone stupid enough to help him. The detective appeared around the pillar's edge, his Glock trained on Marcus's chest. At this range, there would be no missing, no last-second heroics, just the final punctuation mark on 15 years of guilt and failure. You want to know the real truth about your daughter? Coleman asked, his finger tightening on the trigger. She wasn't asking questions about the money. She was asking questions about you. Why her daddy never came to see her anymore. Why he chose drinking over protecting his family. Deborah told her you didn't care enough to fight for her. The words cut deeper than any physical wound could have. Marcus felt something break inside his chest, some carefully constructed wall between past pain and present purpose. You're lying. Your ex-wife showed Angie those newspaper clippings about your arrests, your DUIs, your bar fights. That little girl spent her last months thinking her father had abandoned her. When David put his hands on her that night, you know what she said? "Daddy's not coming. Daddy never comes." Marcus saw red. Pure, undiluted rage flooded his system, drowning out fear and tactical thinking and self-preservation. He came around the pillar fast and low, the stolen gun forgotten, his fists seeking the satisfaction that 15 years of sobriety and therapy and careful emotional management had never provided. Coleman got off one shot, wild, panicked, before Marcus's left hook connected with his jaw. The detective staggered backward, and Marcus followed with a right cross that sent Coleman sprawling across the debris-strewn floor. "She called for me?" Marcus asked, standing over the fallen man. Blood ran from Coleman's split lip, and his service weapon lay several feet away. "My little girl called for her daddy?" "Every night," Coleman gasped, spitting blood. "Deborah said she cried for you right up until—" Marcus's next punch silenced him permanently. When the red haze cleared, Marcus found himself kneeling beside Coleman's unconscious form, his knuckles split and bleeding. The detective was still breathing but wouldn't be answering questions anytime soon. Around him, the gunfire had stopped, replaced by an ominous silence that felt like held breath. Footsteps approached from the darkness, slow, deliberate, non-threatening. Marcus grabbed Coleman's gun and turned to see a figure emerge from the shadows. Middle-aged, graying, wearing the kind of cheap suit that screamed former cop or current private investigator. David Hutchins looked exactly like Marcus remembered, minus 15 years of easy living. The man who'd supposedly killed his daughter by pushing her down the stairs stood 10 feet away, hands raised, expression carefully neutral. "Hello, Marcus," David said quietly. "I think it's time we talked about what really happened to Angie." Behind him, more figures emerged from the plant's depths. Rosa Martinez, supported by a young woman who could only be Sophia's real sister, and 3 men Marcus didn't recognize but who moved with military precision. Not Coleman's people. Someone else's operation entirely. "The trafficking ring is finished," David continued, nudging Coleman's unconscious form with his foot. "Question is, are you ready to learn who your daughter really was and why she had to die to protect dozens of other children?" Marcus stared at his daughter's stepfather, feeling the foundations of everything he'd believed for 15 years shifting beneath his feet like earthquake-broken ground. Some truths, he realized, were more dangerous than any lie. Marcus kept the gun trained on David while his mind tried to process the impossible. His daughter's stepfather, the man he'd blamed for Angie's death, the man whose face had haunted his nightmares for 15 years, stood in the wreckage of a human trafficking operation, talking about truth like it was something Marcus could handle. "You killed her," Marcus said, his voice hoarse from shouting and adrenaline. "You pushed my little girl down the stairs because she saw something she shouldn't have." David's expression remained carefully neutral, but something shifted behind his eyes. Not guilt, but a deeper kind of pain. "That's what we needed everyone to believe, including you." "We?" Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. "You and Coleman? You and my ex-wife? Who's we, David?" "FBI Task Force," said one of the men behind David, stepping forward with his hands visible but moving with the confident authority of federal law enforcement. "Agent Santos, Human Trafficking Division. Mr. Hutchins has been undercover for 17 years, embedded in Detroit's trafficking network." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "FBI, undercover, 17 years. You're lying," Marcus whispered, but even as he said it, pieces were clicking into place with terrible clarity. David's mysterious cash payments to Deborah, his strange work schedule, the way he'd appeared in their lives just months before everything fell apart. "Your daughter figured it out," David said quietly. "She was too smart for her own good, just like you always said. Started noticing things, my phone calls, the money, the way certain people treated me when we went out. She thought I was a drug dealer." Marcus lowered the gun slightly. "Angie never said anything to me about—" "Because you weren't there," David interrupted, and the words carried no malice, just exhausted truth. "You were drinking yourself to death in dive bars while your 15-year-old daughter was trying to piece together why her stepfather was living a double life." The accusation stung because it was accurate. Those final months before Angie's death were a blur of alcohol and self-pity, of showing up drunk to her school events and forgetting promises he'd made. He'd been a failure as a father long before Coleman buried the evidence. "She confronted me 3 days before she died," David continued. "Told me she knew I was involved in something illegal and that she was going to call you, have you come get her. I tried to explain without blowing my cover, but she wouldn't listen. Said she'd rather live with a drunk than a criminal." Rosa Martinez was watching from behind the federal agents, her face streaked with tears but her eyes alert. Alive. Safe. Whatever had happened here tonight, Marcus had accomplished that much. "So you killed her to protect your operation," Marcus said, raising the gun again. "I loved her," David snapped, and for the first time his careful composure cracked. "That little girl was the closest thing to a daughter I'd ever had. She called me Dad at Christmas dinner. She asked me to teach her to drive. His voice broke, and Marcus saw something he'd never expected, genuine grief in the eyes of his daughter's killer. Agent Santos cleared his throat. The night Angela died, she'd discovered files on Mr. Hutchins's laptop, surveillance photos, case notes, target profiles. She was going to upload everything to social media, expose what she thought was a drug operation. If she had, 17 years of undercover work would have been destroyed, and hundreds of trafficking victims would never have been rescued. Marcus felt the factory floor tilting beneath him. "So you pushed her down the stairs?" "I drugged her," David said, each word seeming to cost him something vital. "Slipped Rohypnol into her soda while we argued. Just enough to knock her out until I could figure out what to do, how to explain without getting us all killed. But she fought it, tried to run upstairs to her room, and—" The image formed in Marcus's mind with crystal clarity. His daughter, disoriented and terrified, stumbling on stairs she'd climbed 1,000 times, falling not because someone pushed her, but because someone she trusted had poisoned her to protect a secret that seemed more important than her life. "You watched her die," Marcus whispered. "I held her while she died," David corrected, and tears were running down his face now. "Told her I was sorry, that I loved her, that her daddy loved her. She said," his voice cracked again, "she said to tell you she forgave you for not coming home." The gun slipped from Marcus's fingers, clattering on concrete. 15 years of rage and guilt and carefully constructed hatred crumbled like sandcastles at high tide. His daughter had forgiven him. His daughter had died protecting other children, even without knowing it. Coleman was supposed to investigate and close the case quietly, Agent Santos continued. Instead, he saw an opportunity. Started blackmailing Mr. Hutchins, demanding information about our operations in exchange for keeping the FBI connection buried. Marcus looked at Coleman's unconscious form, understanding flooding through him. He wasn't covering up a murder, he was covering up federal involvement. "And making us complicit in everything that came after," David said bitterly. "Every girl who disappeared, every family destroyed, Coleman made sure we knew their blood was on our hands too." The truth Marcus had spent 15 years seeking was more devastating than any lie could have been. His daughter had died not because he failed to protect her, but because protecting others had been more important than protecting her. Some victories, he realized, felt exactly like defeat. Marcus stared at David's tear-streaked face, feeling the weight of 15 years collapsing into this single moment. His daughter's stepfather, no, his daughter's father in every way that had mattered, knelt beside Coleman's unconscious form, shoulders shaking with grief that Marcus finally recognized as genuine. "She forgave me," Marcus whispered, testing the words like a foreign language. "Angie forgave me." "She loved you," David said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Even when you weren't there, even when the drinking got bad. She kept your picture by her bed, told anyone who'd listen about her daddy the champion." The factory around them felt suddenly too small, too quiet. Agent Santos was speaking into his radio, coordinating cleanup and arrests, but his words seemed to come from underwater. Rosa Martinez approached slowly, her hand resting protectively on Sophia's shoulder. "Mr. Washington," Rosa said softly, "thank you for coming, for believing her." Marcus looked at the little girl, 8 years old, the same age Angie had been when he'd first taught her to throw a jab. Sophia's eyes held that same fierce intelligence that had gotten his daughter killed, that had made her ask too many questions about the wrong things. "What happens now?" Marcus asked Agent Santos. "To Coleman, to the operation, to—" Coleman gets arrested. The trafficking ring gets dismantled, and you get to decide who you want to be, Santos replied, pocketing his radio. David tells me you run a boxing gym now. Clean operation, helping kids. Trying to. Marcus flexed his split knuckles, feeling the familiar ache of old injuries and new purpose. 15 years too late, but trying. David stood slowly, moving like a man carrying invisible weight. She would have been proud of you. The gym, the kids you're helping. Angie always said her daddy was a hero. The words should have brought comfort, but they only made the hollow space in Marcus's chest feel larger. His daughter had died believing in a version of him that hadn't existed. A father who would have chosen her over the bottle, who would have come home when she called, who would have protected her from the dangers she was too young to understand. I need to ask you something, Marcus said to David. That night, when she was dying, did she suffer? David closed his eyes, and Marcus could see him reliving those final moments. She was confused, kept asking why she couldn't move her legs, why I looked so scared. I told her it was going to be okay, that you were coming. That was the only lie I ever told her. Because I wasn't coming. Because you didn't know she needed you. David's voice carried 15 years of carefully contained guilt. If I could take it back, if I could find another way— You can't, Marcus interrupted, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. Neither of us can. The question is, what we do with what's left. He looked around the factory, at the evidence of Coleman's operation, at the women they'd rescued, at the man who'd loved his daughter enough to carry the burden of her death alone. Elena's betrayal still burned like acid in his throat, but underneath it was something he hadn't felt in 15 years, the possibility of moving forward instead of just surviving. Elena, he said suddenly, where is she? Santos consulted his phone. In custody, along with 12 other accomplices. The social services connection was how they identified vulnerable families, kids who wouldn't be missed. Marcus thought about their coffee dates, their conversations about helping troubled youth, the way she'd listened to his stories about the gym with what he'd thought was genuine interest. Every detail he'd shared about the kids he trained had been intelligence gathering. Every moment of connection had been performance. How long? He asked. How long was she reporting on me? Since you opened Washington's gym, David said quietly. Coleman wanted to make sure you stayed focused on redemption instead of revenge. Elena was supposed to keep you distracted, give you something to hope for. The manipulation should have destroyed him, should have sent him back to the bottle, back to the familiar numbness of self-destruction. Instead, Marcus felt something unexpected rising in his chest, not rage or despair, but a cold, clean anger that focused everything into sharp clarity. My daughter died protecting children she'd never met, he said, more to himself than to the others. I've spent 15 years drinking over a guilt that was never mine to carry. He picked up Coleman's fallen gun, checked the safety, and handed it to Agent Santos. What do you need from me? Testimony? Evidence? What do I need to do to make sure this actually ends? David looked at him with something that might have been hope. You could start by forgiving yourself. Angie did. Marcus felt tears threatening but held them back. There would be time for grief later, time to properly mourn both his daughter's death and the 15 years he'd lost to guilt. Right now, there was work to do. The point of no return, he realized, wasn't about choosing between safety and justice. It was about choosing between the man he'd been and the man his daughter had always believed him to be. Marcus stood in the factory's wreckage, feeling the weight of 15 years shifting like tectonic plates beneath his feet. The truth, all of it, sat heavy in his chest, changing the shape of everything he'd believed about himself, about Angie, about the night that had destroyed his world. There's something else, David said quietly, reaching into his jacket with careful movements. He withdrew a small envelope, yellowed with age and worn soft at the edges. She wrote this the day she confronted me. Never had a chance to send it. Marcus stared at his name written in Angie's careful script, the handwriting he'd helped her practice at the kitchen table when she was 8, when the world still made sense and fathers protected daughters instead of failing them. I can't, he whispered. You have to, David replied, extending the envelope. She meant for you to have it. Agent Santos stepped back, giving them space. Rosa Martinez gathered Sophia closer, understanding that some moments belonged only to the people who'd lived them. Marcus took the letter with hands that shook like he was detoxing all over again. He opened it slowly, afraid the paper might crumble, afraid the words might be accusations he couldn't survive hearing. Instead, he found something infinitely worse: love from a daughter who died believing in him despite every reason not to. "Daddy," the letter began, and Marcus felt something break open in his chest. "I know you're hurting, and that's why you can't come home. Mom showed me the newspaper stories, but I don't care about that stuff. I remember when you taught me to fight, how you said I was strong enough to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. I'm trying to be strong like you taught me. David is in trouble. He's mixed up with bad people, but I think he's trying to help. I want to call you, but Mom says you're too sick to handle family problems. I hope you get better soon because I miss talking to you about everything. I forgive you for being gone. When you're ready to come home, I'll be here. Love, your champion, Angie." Marcus read it twice, then a third time, each word rewiring something fundamental in his understanding of that final year. His daughter hadn't been ashamed of him. She'd been worried about him. She'd seen his absence as sickness, not abandonment. She'd been trying to solve David's mystery, not to expose him, but to protect him. She was 15 years old, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. She was a child trying to save everyone, just like her father, David replied. Marcus looked up sharply. "I never saved anyone. I couldn't even save her. You saved Sophia tonight. You saved Rosa. You saved every kid who's walked into your gym over the past 5 years looking for something to believe in." David's voice was steady now, the grief replaced by something harder, more determined. "Angie didn't die because you failed her. She died because she was your daughter, because she had your courage and your sense of justice and your stubborn refusal to let bad things happen to good people." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each one cracking apart the careful structure of guilt and self-hatred he'd built his sobriety around. If Angie's death wasn't his fault, if she'd forgiven him, if she'd died trying to protect others, what did that make the last 15 years? What did that make the man he'd become? Coleman knew, Marcus realized suddenly. He knew about the letter. Santos nodded grimly. Found it when he processed the scene. He's had it all this time, saving it for when he needed maximum leverage. The cruelty of it staggered Marcus. Coleman hadn't just buried evidence. He'd stolen his daughter's final words, weaponized her love, turned her forgiveness into a tool of manipulation. For 15 years, Marcus could have known that she'd died believing in him. Instead, he'd lived with the lie that she'd died disappointed. "I want to see him," Marcus said, looking at Coleman's unconscious form. "When he wakes up, I want to look him in the eye." "That's not a good idea," Santos began, but Marcus cut him off. "He stole my daughter's voice for 15 years. He used her death to control people, to hurt children, to build his empire on the foundation of my guilt." Marcus folded the letter carefully, placing it over his heart. "I'm not going to hurt him, but he's going to hear what she wanted to tell me. He's going to know that his power over me is finished." David stepped forward, understanding passing between them. "What do you need?" Marcus looked around the factory one final time, at the evidence of Coleman's crimes, at the women they'd rescued, at the federal agents who would ensure justice finally came. Then he looked at Sophia, 8 years old and fierce, exactly the way Angie had been. "I need to go home," Marcus said. "I need to clean out my gym and start over. No more hiding from the truth, no more guilt over sins that were never mine to carry." The truth hadn't set him free. It had shown him he'd been free all along. The sunrise over Detroit painted the factory district in shades of rust and redemption. Marcus sat on the loading dock where it had all ended 6 hours earlier, watching federal agents load the last of Coleman's evidence into unmarked vans. The letter rested in his shirt pocket, its weight lighter than air but more valuable than every championship belt he'd ever won. Agent Santos approached with 2 cups of coffee and the tired satisfaction of a man who'd finally closed a case that had haunted him for years. "Paramedics cleared you," he said, settling beside Marcus. "No concussion, but those ribs are going to hurt for weeks." Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully, feeling the morning chill through his torn shirt. "How many?" he asked. "How many girls did we save?" 17 in the trucks, another dozen in safe houses across the city. Santos sipped his coffee, watching the sunrise. Rosa says Sophia's been asking for you. Wants to know if you'll teach her to box. The request should have terrified him. Another 8-year-old girl, another chance to fail someone who deserved better. Instead, Marcus found himself smiling for the first time in longer than he could remember. Maybe, he said, when she's older. When I figure out how to be the man my daughter thought I was. David emerged from the factory, flanked by 2 federal agents but not cuffed. 15 years of undercover work had earned him consideration, though Marcus suspected his cooperation in exposing Coleman carried more weight than old loyalties. Their eyes met across the loading dock, 2 men bound together by love for the same lost girl. He's going into witness protection, Santos explained quietly. New identity, relocation, the works. Coleman had enough dirty cops on payroll to make staying dangerous. Marcus nodded, understanding. Justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about making sure the people who'd suffered enough could finally stop suffering. "Thank you," David called out as the agents guided him toward a waiting sedan, for finishing what she started. Marcus raised his hand in farewell, watching his daughter's stepfather disappear into a future that would never include visits to her grave or conversations about the woman she might have become. Some prices were too high, even for redemption. The gym felt different when Marcus finally made it home that evening. Not smaller or shabbier, but fuller somehow, weighted with possibility instead of penance. He stood in the center of the ring where he'd spent 5 years teaching kids to fight their demons, and pulled out his phone. "Charlie, it's Marcus." "Yeah, I know what time it is." He looked around at the heavy bags, the speed bags, the photos of young fighters who'd found their way through these doors. "I want to expand, add counseling services, maybe a scholarship program. You still know people at Wayne State's social work department?" His former trainer's voice crackled with surprise, and something that might have been pride. "Marcus, you know that kind of operation takes serious funding, permits, staff, insurance. I'll figure it out." Marcus touched Angie's letter through his pocket. "I've got something to build toward now." After hanging up, he pulled on his gloves and worked the heavy bag until his ribs screamed and his knuckles bled through the leather. Not punishing himself this time, but preparing. Building the strength he'd need to carry forward instead of just surviving. The phone rang as he was wrapping his hands. Unknown number, but he answered anyway. "Mr. Washington? This is Dr. Sarah Chen from Child Protective Services. Agent Santos gave me your number. We have several children who've been displaced by tonight's arrests, and Rosa Martinez suggested you might be willing to help with temporary placement coordination." Marcus looked around his empty gym, seeing it suddenly filled with voices and laughter, and the sound of kids discovering they were stronger than they'd ever imagined. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Whatever you need." 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the same spot where Sophia had burst through his doors that night, watching her teach a 6-year-old boy how to wrap his hands properly. Rosa worked at the front desk, handling calls from parents and coordinating with the social workers who'd become regular fixtures around Washington's Second Chance Gym. The name change had been David's suggestion, delivered through Agent Santos along with the deed to a building 3 blocks away, purchased years ago under an assumed identity, now transferred to the gym's nonprofit foundation. "Your daughter would have loved this," Rosa said, joining Marcus at ringside. "All these kids finding their voices, learning to fight back." Marcus touched the letter in his pocket, creased now from constant handling but no less precious. "She did love this," he corrected quietly. "She just never got to see it." Outside, Detroit hummed with the same mixture of struggle and hope it had always carried. But inside these walls, something different was growing. Not redemption, which implied payment for past sins, but continuation. The simple, revolutionary act of becoming the person he'd always had the capacity to be. Angie's champion at last.